Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Blush Studio. Today I'm taking you behind the scenes once again for my latest watercolor piece. As you can see, I am still working on the sketch here. I really believe that drawing is the foundation for all forms of art, including watercolor, and so for all of my main watercolor pieces, I really do a detailed sketch so I can lay everything out, solve any problems before I get to adding the paint, which, as you might imagine, is much harder to correct if you make a mistake. So I'm just working on the sketch, and then I'll show you my paint palette. So here is my palette. I actually have a pretty large palette and I place the paint inside of each of these little sections, but I use like a third of it maybe because I like to work with a limited palette and just really use what I have and love and just get really comfortable with what I have. So I'm going to talk to you about the paints that I have in this palette and then talk you through kind of some of my thought processes around the colors that I mixed today. So on the left here we have ivory black. I prefer that over lamp black. And then my white that I have is Chinese white. It's obviously pretty dirty. That first red is a cadmium red. It's a little bit brighter than alizarin crimson, which is kind of my main red. This is the one that in general I go to when I'm mixing things, but if I want something a little brighter, I go with the cadmium. Then I have next to that, I have burnt umber and raw sienna, or burnt sienna, and then yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is kind of a staple for me. It's really a go-to. My other go-to is this terre verte. It's the yellow shade. It's just kind of a more desaturated green. You can see if I can get it to focus here. There you go. So that is just a color that I love. It's a staple for me. Sometimes I use it straight out of the tube, but I love to use it to mix in with things. It's just a little more desaturated than sap green, which is what I have right next to it. Kind of my other go-to green, if you will. Then for blues, I have ultramarine blue. Another one that I love is indigo. This is kind of my main blue. And then I have burnt sienna. So raw sienna is on the left, burnt sienna is on the right. Then I have cadmium yellow and permanent rose. So these are brighter. I don't usually use them, so they're kind of on the other side of my palette that you can't see because I just don't use them a whole. So hopefully that was helpful to see kind of the colors that I like to use in my palette. I'll have them listed down below, and if you'd like just a more detailed look at the colors that I use in my palette and why I use them, I'll create a separate video. Just let me know in the comments down below. Alright, now let's get started with this paint palette. I don't always start with a fresh palette, one that's been cleaned, but for this one I decided that I needed to just because it's not a color palette that I generally go for. So this is for my November desktop calendar, so it needs to be a little more moody, a little more fall. So I am starting with my Terre Verte, the really desaturated green, adding a little bit of the sap green just to bring some more life, and then I have a section with some yellow ochre here on the side. It's not unusual for me to have like a main color mixed and then have a section that has either more of a yellow tint or a blue tint or whatever color I'm working with off to the side so that I can add that into my colors just to kind of add some depth and some variation. As you can see, I decided I hadn't quite made enough, and so I just mixed it all in. And that's one thing about color mixing that I just love is it's very intuitive and you just kind of play around with it until you get it right, and then you paint. And if you don't really feel like you get it right, sometimes the color dries differently and it just takes a lot of experimenting. So there you can see I have a little section off to the side with the yellow ochre. I just want that, I want to have something that I can pull into my painting later if I decide that it needs to add some warmth, but it's similar enough to the other green that it'll tie in as a whole. Now I'm starting on my next color. I believe this is the color, if memory serves me. This is the color that I used and ended up mixing throughout the rest of the colors in my palette. So I'm going in my trusty alizarin crimson. Again, this is kind of my main red. It's really what I prefer to work with as a base for all of my reds and purples. And adding some yellow ochre. You're going to see a whole lot of yellow ochre in here because it's just that rich, warm color. What do you say we speed things up a bit? Alright, so I'm adding a little bit of indigo in here just to help deepen the color. I want a really rich color. So even though I want it to be warm and a little bit desaturated, I want there to be some depth to this color. So I added some indigo, pulled in some more alizarin crimson, and then I think I'm going to be using this for my base. But I want to test it out first on a scrap piece of paper just to see how the colors mix together. And apparently I decided it needed to be a little more purple. We're going to step down here, still using the previous color as a base. You can see I'm mixing almost the same color. Whoops, added way too much indigo in here. Clean off the brush, add some more crimson and some yellow ochre as well. So I like to test things out, especially with a color palette that I'm not used to using. I like to test them out on a scrap piece of paper just so that I can isolate the colors and see how they work together. Make sure that there's some harmony in there. So as you can see, the first kind of plummy purpley color that I had, it was just way too desaturated. So I knew I needed to bump up the saturation a little bit more, just get more of a jewel tone in there rather than kind of a dead tone, if that makes sense. So I'm just testing things out on the card. I'm assuming that I'll show it to you later. I can't remember from when I filmed this. I was just really trying to be in the zone. So you can see I'm taking the color that I mixed on the top right over there. I'm mixing it in with the green so that I can get that desaturated color in there and just kind of a neutral tone. I want them to all work together, so one easy way to do that is to mix and interchange the colors. So even though red and green are complements and so they will create like a brown, if I add a bunch of yellow ochre in with that, it creates kind of a nice golden yellow that's not too too saturated. It's not too bright. So saturation refers to how bright something is, and so when I want something that's desaturated, I want something that's not as bright, if that makes sense. So I do want these tones to still be rich, but not to scream, you know, like kindergarten classroom, if that makes sense. So now we've moved on to the painting. Obviously this has been sped up. The original video is about 40 minutes long, and that was just a little bit too long for me. So I decided to really speed things up so that you just kind of get the gist of what I'm doing, and we can still talk through it, but you don't have to sit here for as long as I was working on it. So the plummy tone that I created, I'm using in the stem here, and I just love that it creates a little bit more depth and excitement than like a brown stem would. And then I'm also using it in the accents of my white dogwood flowers. So I'll be throwing that in throughout and adding it to other elements, but it's kind of the same old thing that you see in a lot of my other watercolors where I'm layering color and adding things in and just going in with first a light wash and then the next wash has like the deeper tones. Like you can see here, I'm just adding definition and some shadows, and I just get a little deeper every time. Now you can see on this rose on the left that I got really dark really fast. And don't be afraid to do that, or at least play around with it. I knew that this flower was going to be mostly in shadow and really dark, and so I just went for it. And that one ended up turning out great, and the one in the center that I obviously haven't added anything to ended up being kind of rough for this painting. And you know what, that's okay. This is just kind of a painting just for me and just a way that I can kind of experiment and play around with things. And so it's okay if things don't go as planned, right? That's kind of just what this watercolor is about, and I would love to see, like, if you do a painting based off of this or inspired by this, or just work off of the fall colors. I would love to see a picture of it. You can tag me on Instagram. I'm at Blush Design. And I'd love to hear about how you're experimenting and what things you felt like turned out really well and what things you struggled with. For me, again, like I think that the left rose ended up turning out pretty well, but the rose that I'm working on now, I just really struggled with and kind of fought with quite a bit. And so that's okay, that happens. And you learn from it. I learned a lot from it, and I can't wait to try it again. Now you can see here I'm adding some more detail to the leaves. In hindsight, after looking at the final, I really wish I had gone in with more detail and given these guys some more love. They had a lot of really fun texture, and just like the natural veins of the leaf should have given me more inspiration to play, if that makes sense. And I really wish I had done more with them. Now I love these thinner vine-like leaves that they're just like squiggly and so playful, and I just really love how they can add so much movement. I'm not even sure what they're called, and if you know, like, let me know. I mean, I really feel like they're a little too squiggly and not stiff enough to be like Italian ruscus, but they still have kind of that playful vibe. But yeah, if you know, like if it's, maybe it's a variation of that, I don't know. But if you know, let me know. I ended up adding it in a lot of different places because I just loved how fun it was. Adding more depth to the dogwoods is really tricky because they're white, and so maybe that's another reason I felt like I needed to add more of these deeper greens just to give that a backdrop for it to stand up against. But yeah, I just really liked how that worked out. So here I am adding more of the details. Again, see, I like really wish I had added and had more fun with the details and the texture in those leaves, but I didn't, and that's okay. Maybe we'll do that next month. And there's the completed painting, all scanned and edited. If you'd like to see artwork similar to this or different videos or tutorials, don't forget to leave a comment down below, like and subscribe so that I know. And if you'd like to see more of my work, I'll leave a link down below, not only to my website, but also a free download that I have available every month.